Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And our senior editor, Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Kamala Harris supposedly has raised somewhere between $81 and $378 trillion in the last 36 hours. If you believe these numbers that don't have any official reporting requirements to them for another 3 months, I have a bridge to sell you. But nonetheless, let us assume that this Democratic enthusiasm toward Kamala Harris is real. It's growing. It's exuberant. It's excited. They have been unleashed from the Democrats from this connection to this very old, very impaired man who was, it appeared, dragging them down to the depths of the ocean. I think we should start with talking about the right's response a little bit. I know this sounds like a weird place to go because we could talk about, how she secured the nomination in 24 hours and all that, Kamala Harris. But there's a bit of a, I think, mildly self-destructive quality arising among Republicans, which is that they can't quit Joe Biden yet. And the talk of the day in half the country was, is Joe Biden dead? And I wanted to bring this up because I would like quickly to explain why Joe Biden isn't dead and why he issued a letter on Twitter and all of that. Now, maybe he's non-compos mentis. He's just suffered the humiliation of humiliations. Kitty Dukakis once said of Michael Dukakis's defeat in 1988 that it was like a public death. Biden having asserted that he was going to run for office and that he was going to win the presidency, he's the only one to win for Trump, was compelled by circumstance not to do that, to resign. The resignation was so emotionally difficult for him that he did it in private, in quiet, without the cameras on him. We're told he's going to speak later this week. No one has said when that will be. And if he were dead, we know, because it would be an enormous political advantage for the Democrats if he were dead. He would die, people would cry, there would be a state funeral, all of politics with Donald Trump kind of having this momentum would halt for a week. Horses would run, cars would go backward, horses would go, he would lie in state in the Capitol. Like, there would be no political reason whatsoever to hide his death. And I think Republicans need to drop this in 3 seconds because it makes them sound crazy.
Well, I don't think any Republican official suggested that he's dead. Right.
No,
so this is what you're seeing on Twitter.
It's the right vibe. It's not just Twitter, though. I mean, I'm talking about emails I'm getting.
There are real concerns about his health.
I'm having.
But yeah, obviously there's something wrong with him. There's something wrong with him. He hasn't been seen in public for 5 days. The White House says he'll return to the executive mansion this afternoon. We're recording this early Tuesday. He delivered remarks clearly off a script in a Zoom call into Vice President Harris's first speech at the campaign headquarters. And I'll just say his voice was slurred. If you listen to his voice, he was slurred. And I don't know what that is about. I do think there are real questions about whether he suffered some type of
It was also kind of funny because at one point Harris did say, Joe, I know you're there on the call still, right. And she started to say recording, so that fueled more of it. And it's possible that it was.
You're breaking up. Are you?
Well, then he said, "I'm still there."
Yeah.
Then he said, "I'm still here." I don't know. I think that there are real questions about Biden's condition, and I think they should remain if he remains president for the next 6 months. This is a very odd situation. We've only had it in the past 100 years once before, where you have a incumbent president whose vice president is running for the reelect, right? So it's the incumbent president is not term limited. He withdrew from the race. He withdrew from the race 107 days before the election. He says he's going to remain the president while his vice president, who in Soviet-style fashion locked up the nomination within 48 hours of this letter posted to Twitter. he's going to be doing things, presumably, as president. And she's going to have to respond to what he does, as well as to what the Republicans are saying about her and her eventual running mate.
Okay, so all I'm saying is stop with the Biden is dead talk. Biden is sick. Biden being sick is an issue for his continuation as president or the management of the country till January 20th. That is an absolutely legitimate issue. It's not even entirely a political issue. I mean, that's the odd thing, is it should not be a political issue. We are talking about continuity of government, the role of the executive branch, the fact that we had the Secret Service director go before the House Oversight Committee yesterday morning and perform in a way that would have meant, in a more rational administration, that around 14 minutes into her testimony, her cell phone should have rung with the President of the United States saying, "You are fired, Ms. Cheadle. Get your stuff out of your office in 5 minutes." It was the worst performance before a congressional hearing I have ever seen, and I have seen literally hundreds and hundreds of hours of congressional hearings, if not more. And so the not being home, the nobody there problem is a real problem. It's not precisely a political problem. And maybe it's one of those issues like the SWIFT boats or something like that, that I'm saying this, and, liberal Democrats are going to say this, and everyone's going to get all like, how dare you say this, and you're just conspiring, he's not dead, and all of that. But that maybe I'm wrong in this sense, which is that it's like a burr. There's like a little burr, and it's in people's heads, and they'll say, it's a deep fake Joe Biden on that call. That was an AI voice. Or when we see him speak, if he ever does this from the Oval Office, that it's like, it's a deep fake or something like that. Like that's the world we live in. These are ideas that are floated around. I'm just saying it would be better for Republicans to focus on what is now the issue, which is that Kamala Harris is running for president, and she has 106 days, and she has many liabilities, and we know them, but the American people don't necessarily know what those liabilities are, and it is time for them to learn.
Well, that's where I thought you were going to go when you first said the right can't quit Joe Biden. I thought this is where you were going to go, because there was a full day of Republicans saying things like, well, we'll see if she's the one on the ballot instead of Joe, because there's laws. We're a nation of laws, and and there was this whole like response of denial, like, we're not accepting it yet. we're not willing to face Kamala yet. Maybe we're still facing Joe Biden, because that was the thing yesterday, was there was this it's unfair, it's anti-democratic, it's all this other stuff, which, by the way, may all be true, but Republicans, I think, made a mistake in everybody saying that, including the Speaker of the House in interviews, and just, I think they just ought to say, like, because nobody cares. The voters aren't going to care how she, wrapped up the nomination stuff. That's all interesting to talk about. But like Speaker Mike Johnson has just, they've just got to move on and train the target, and accept it.
Yeah. When you're living in unprecedented times, it's sometimes hard to get a grasp of what is happening and what the correct arguments are. I think now that Harris, as of last night, has locked up enough delegates, according to the AP, to glide into the nomination, you'll see more Republicans talking about her record. And I think her speech last night and to the campaign headquarters in Delaware offered Republicans a lot of opportunities for attack. She started by talking about her record as a prosecutor in California, and then setting up a contrast between her legal background and Donald Trump's legal troubles, including his recent conviction. And then she went on to talk about the importance of civil rights, gay rights, women's rights, and how we need to make America diverse, inclusive. What I saw in that speech was a combination of Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016 with the Biden record, which Harris also championed. And I don't really think that's the right way for Democrats to go about defeating Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton lost, by the way. One of the reasons she lost was that her campaign was almost exclusively devoted to attacks on Trump's character and to kind of pushing the coalition of the diverse within the Democratic Party, Black Lives Matter, gay rights, yes, all women, to the exclusion of the real economic anxieties of working class people in this country in 2016. So Harris, I think, is going to do that mainly because that's what she believes, that as a California liberal, that's where she comes from. That's the atmosphere in which she came of political age. But she also has to do it at a time where prices are still 20% higher than when she entered office, when she was tasked with solving the southern border crisis, and that crisis is ongoing. And the world is a mess, and she won't even attend Bibi Netanyahu's speech to the American Congress in a real, middle finger to the pro-Israel community.
That's all substantive, and I agree. And I saw the speech, but what jumped out at me was not the substance or the pretend substance of it at all. Was that they're sort of establishing Kamala as a lifestyle brand, as a sense of energy and identity and
relative
youth. And here she is, and breathing new life into the Democratic Party. And I think on that level, that's a pretty formidable way for them to go. Again, if they can be protected, if the campaign can be protected from the harder substantive things that Matt's raising. I just want to bring up one more point about this Biden, not letting go of Joe Biden. I think, John, that this is not going away. Biden is not getting better. He's going to get worse. And there are, as of now, 6 more months for him to be in office, for us to have weeks and stretches of days asking questions about where he is, where he's talking from, who's reporting on him. This is going to be a drawn out period of speculation about Joe Biden until either there is some resolution or there isn't on it.
I do not disagree. I'm literally only talking about the "is Joe Biden dead" thing. Maybe I should have narrowed this down. So obviously, the condition of the sitting president of the United States, who will be president of the United States till January 20th, 2025, is a matter of some import, as is the fact that the prime minister of the nation that is fighting one of the world's two ongoing, massively important wars, and the administration's behavior toward that prime minister should be a political issue. I want to challenge a little bit the idea that Harris, she brings energy and she brings enthusiasm and all of that, but I think the one thing about the Mike John, we need to find out how the Democrats wired this so fast. This is all a fix, and Matt said yesterday, 14 million Democratic votes cast in the, cast in the primaries were thrown out of leaving only Jason Palmer as a legitimate candidate for the presidency for his victory in American Samoa. But I think that there is a larger message there. Not that I think that Republicans have come to this consciously as yet, but the idea that the fix is in is a very potent idea, not only for Trumpy Republicans, but for independent and unaffiliated voters who don't like either party because they think that it's all a fix and everything is a fix. And the behavior of the Democratic Party over not only the last 36 hours, but maybe the last 3 weeks is a fix. Like, there's no question. It's politically impressive how unified they were in this process of getting her the nomination unambiguously 5 seconds after Biden's letter came out, which means that it wasn't 5 seconds. This means that every leader of every state delegation, there were phone calls that we were not a party to, and that were going on behind the scenes to line everything up so that in 7 seconds she could have 2,000 delegates committed to her. That doesn't happen in 24 hours. Maybe it could happen in 48 or 96 hours. But how do you even get everybody on the phone? I know it's a crisis, and so people are all hands on deck and all that. But what Trump can say, or what the Republicans can say, is the Democratic Party is a cabal. It's a cabal. They put their finger on something and they make it happen, and they have this lapdog press that accepts everything they say as gospel. They decided that the voters had chosen this infirm old man, and that wasn't good. So they just switched it all around. And God knows what else they'll switch all around. I don't think that's a bad message.
But there are polls showing at least that large majorities of Democratic voters do think he should step aside and not run again.
Democratic voters.
No, I know, but I'm saying that's who that's who is impacted most by throwing out the votes is the voters. No,
yes, I agree.
I don't know if they're most impacted. I think I'm most impacted by the idea that they're foisting Kamala Harris to be the next president of the United States, a woman with no base of support, no movement, no clear ideological profile. Her last competitive election, as you pointed out yesterday, Seth, was in 2010, which she almost lost. And now she's the anointed champion of the Democratic Party. I'm affected by that. I mean, it's ridiculous. Right. I heard Chris Coons on Special Report last night say,
he's the senator from Delaware.
Senator from Delaware, who is one of Joe Biden's greatest supporters, who as recently as Friday said that Joe Biden was staying in the race. Now, of course, he's the co-chair of the Harris campaign for president and believes this is totally, completely necessary for Joe Biden to step down. And when
he's the only one more affected than you, Matt.
Maybe. When Bret Baier asked him, what about those 14 million voters? Chris Coons said, well, everyone knew when they voted in a Democratic primary that they were voting for the Biden-Harris ticket and that this might happen. I am sorry. No one thinks that when they go into a incumbent president's primary and they're saying, well, what? I'm really voting for the vice presidential nominee. No one believes that. Half the people don't even know who the vice president is. Right. But this argumentation of the ease with which they're slipped into, well, now it's Kamala, is, I think, disturbing to a lot of people, John. I think you're right. And one more point. You know, there was the 8-minute gap in the Nixon Watergate tapes. That 18-minute gap, right? The 18-minute gap. Well, now there's a 37-minute gap between the letter that was posted on X and Joe Biden's endorsement of Harris on X. And I want to know what happened in that half-hour gap, because the original letter contained no endorsement of Harris, and a half hour had to pass before he said that Harris is my choice. And that was kind of the critical move. If Biden had said, I want an open process, she, I think, would have had to participate. And there would be more of an open process than there will be now.
That is the saddest fact about that letter. So he wrote a letter, the purpose of which was effectively to be Washington's olive tree,
Cincinnatus.
Or, everybody gets to sit under their own tree and, contemplate humanity. So it was supposed to be a larger statement of his withdrawal but he didn't do it in a speech. So him sitting in front of the American people intimately in front of a camera, I know that sounds weird to say intimately in front of a camera, but we do live in a television age, saying, I've considered the circumstances, and it would be best for the country and my party and the future if I do not run for a second term. It has been the honor of my life to serve you. It has been the honor of my life to try to lead this country out of the mess and the depths of despair that it was in when I was elected. It's been the honor to fight for democracy, all of that. That's something that is unforgettable. That moment is unforgettable. Nixon's resignation speech, which was done in an atmosphere of abject humiliation and horror, was an unforgettable moment for people who saw it. And Biden didn't get that moment. That was what that letter, I think, was supposed to do. But since they denied him that moment, since he couldn't evidently do it because maybe he would have done it, they separated it out from the Harris endorsement because they wanted the high, and then he was going to do the politics and the low. But this is how bad they've gotten at this, and this is the circumstances that his infirmity has led them to, that once again, they denied him a chance to say something that would be in the history books. And instead, he released a letter on a platform that, as far as I remember, 18 months ago, enormous numbers of Democrats said Democrats should no longer use because it was in the hands of a fascist. He put it out on Twitter himself. He could have sent it to Maggie Haberman.
What wouldn't it have been funny if he put it on Threads?
And
it would have been 2 days before
Blue sky.
anyone knew that he had resigned.
Yeah. But
when you say prevented him, though, you mean the circumstances.
I don't know.
Not like Democratic officials said, no, Mr. President, you don't get. Yeah.
No. I'm presuming he meant to do it and it was his choice. But that the idea, if we're trying to parse out why those two were separated and we don't have a conspiracy theory, that would be, this was the grand moment of his departure from politics, effectively. And the only way he could do it was in a letter that was put out, he should have put it on TikTok. Like,
The last month has turned me into Oliver Stone. So here I'm someone who prides myself in my belief in empirical evidence, but the events of the last month are enough to drive anyone.
Well, let's add some conspiracy
off the
theories.
cliff.
Let's add some conspiracy theories to your conspiracy theory. The fact that we live in a conspiracy theory. Why hasn't Kimberly Cheadle been fired? If I actually watched that hearing yesterday for 3/4 of it. And the interesting thing was that by the end of the hearing, the Democrats wanted her fired also. And it did not start out that way. Jerry Connolly, Democrat from Pennsylvania, threw Kimberly Cheadle a lifeline because he said to her, America's terrible. Things are terrible, right? I mean, don't you agree that there are too many guns out there in the hands of too many people who can do terrible things like this? And all she had to do was say, yes, Senator, I think that's a real problem that a young man like Mr. Crooks can get his hands on a gun and shoot the former president of the United States. We really need to look at this as a society. Like, gimme, he was here. Take this life jacket, take this life preserver, and I'm going to pull you into shore. And she's like, I don't know what I'm not entirely understanding where it is you're going with this question. And he asked her again. And then he started saying, you're being evasive, Director Cheadle. Answer the question. He only asked the question to get her out of the jam. And then by the end of his 5 minutes, he wanted her to resign. I've never seen anything remotely like it in my life. She was testifying before. Now, she would have anyway, I guess, if she had been fired. She was testifying. She is still the director of the Secret Service. She refused to answer sworn under the supervision or the advice and consent or oversight of the House of Representatives, refused to answer their questions. 2 or 3 people said, you were more forthcoming with an ABC News reporter than you are being to the people you are legally obliged to answer truthfully. You just put your hand, swore an oath on the Bible to answer all the questions that we are asking truthfully. And she just sat there stony. She said this was the worst failure in 60 years and didn't resign.
And then she takes responsibility. This is, I think, just a great window into the liberal mind where words carry every significance, but actually have no relationship to action. You just say, I take responsibility, and you think that that's enough. It's not enough. If you take responsibility, you also have to follow it up with conduct. And the conduct in this case is clearly she should have resigned a week ago. She should have resigned within 24 hours of the attack. What the hearing brought out is that people were aware that the shooter was present. The shooter was a person of interest. The shooter had a rangefinder. The shooter was wandering around the perimeter. That was brought to the authorities' attention around 5:30 p.m. So again, why was Trump allowed on stage? Why was this suspect not apprehended? These questions she cannot answer or refuses to answer, and yet she remains in office. And if we had a president who is capable of performing his duties, you would think that he would fire her.
Yes.
Yeah, this is.
But Austin wasn't fired either.
But
Austin, the defense secretary, disappeared.
But he disappeared.
I'm just saying his record, Joe Biden's record is literally to fire no one. And I'm not sure that if Biden were feeling better and on his feet, he would fire.
Yeah, I mean, a urinary tract infection is one thing, almost killing Donald Trump.
Yeah. By the way, but this is
very much worse.
This is very important because, first of all, it's been 9 days, and this is a crime scene investigation. And if you're a cop, if you're a local cop, and something like this happened to the mayor, the idea that it would be 9 days later all she would say is, I direct you to the FBI, which is doing the investigation. They said to her, how many Secret Service agents were deployed? She would not answer the question. They said to her, who was in the president's detail? They would not answer. She would not answer the question. Now, conspiracy theories arise when the official narrative seems to have holes in it. So an unambiguous thing we know, which is that he shot, and then the Secret Service sniper shot him. So then there are ancillary questions. Was there a second shooter? Because there were bullets, there were sounds of bullets in different directions. The answer seems to be that he shot from one area, the sniper shot from the other, and people heard two different shots from two different directions, and those were the two shooters, the one who killed him and his shots. But when it's 9 days and they're not saying anything, and they don't know, the narrative is, we don't know why he did it. He scrubbed his social media, or he never had social media. Everyone says he's fine. He went to high school. He was fine. Oh, he might have 3 burner accounts in Europe, but we don't know. He might have driven somewhere, but we don't know. When he flew a drone, nobody cared. When they don't fill the space with facts, that's when all of this stuff starts to happen. And I'm deeply sorry to say it, but that is not recklessly irresponsible. What's recklessly irresponsible is that the FBI is not doing a briefing every single day saying, here's what we found out today. Now, if they said, we would like to brief you, but we can't, we have an ongoing investigation, and there are things going on in that investigation we cannot talk about, and because they're rolling people up or they're finding out who his fellow conspirators might be or something like that. That would be one thing. Not that they would say that there were fellow conspirators. They're not saying nothing.
We are in a very dangerous place as a country right now. All of this is contributing to it. When you have the world looking on and sees that a shooter had a clean shot at the front runner for the presidential election, that the incumbent president is disappeared for 6 days, speculation about his health, that no one is getting fired for the free shot on the other guy, that world leaders fly into Washington to be met by no one, I'm talking about Bibi Netanyahu here, and to have the scheduled meetings with the president canceled. The appearance of the country as just being completely incompetent, chaotic, and leaderless is very real, and it is getting heightened and intensified by the day. There's a real chaos at the heart of our politics right now.
The danger,
and it's just not being resolved.
The danger is that that's the real story, is that it's incompetence and infirmity and the fish rots from the head. And when you have a president in the condition that Biden is in, nothing works right because it sort of does have to come down from him. The problem is that the human mind reels against the possibility that we are living in chaos and attempts to establish an order out of the chaos. And that order is the conspiracy theory. The virtue of a conspiracy theory is that it is an explanation for things that to you are otherwise inexplicable. And the problem is that when you're Matt or you're me or you're you, Abe, or you're Seth, and it's 9 or 10 days later, and there's some part of your brain that starts getting a little tickled by, yeah, why don't we know why Biden hasn't appeared in 30? And how about the fact that the doctor is his business partner? And why is she temporizing like this before the House Oversight Committee when she could say, Congressman, the gun, it's really bad that people have guns, or say, the rules of my office are that I'm not supposed to mention in public the names of Secret Service officers. That is protocol dating back 100 years from in my office. That's why I can't tell you the names of the officers in question. If we go into private session, obviously you have security clearance and I can tell you. But when Cheadle doesn't do that and all this other stuff happens, you start going somewhere in your head.
Yeah, I mean, I have a short answer for why Cheadle behaves the way she does, and that's because she's a fool. I mean, she's clearly a fool. Yeah. And I mean, regardless of the interchange about guns and, who knows whether she wanted to get political and that's why she was temporizing in response to that, the signal moment of the hearing for me was when Ro Khanna, the Democrat from California, asked Cheadle if she knew what Secret Service Director Stuart Knight had done after the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981. And Cheadle, the current director of the Secret Service, said he remained on duty, to which Representative Khanna said he resigned.
I think Khanna was wrong, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think Khanna was wrong. I believe that Scott stayed in office until November when he retired, so he could get his pension.
Stuart Knight.
I'm going to double check. I'm not going to say that without total confirmation, but it was a powerful moment. Like, she shouldn't have said he stayed in his post. Maybe he did stay in his post.
Yeah, you're right. So he's ended his position as director in November. So he resigned within 3 months. So that was
March. Yeah. Well, it was March. Maybe he resigned, but said he would stay till they confirmed a new. I mean, who knows?
Well, the assassination was in March, and then he resigned.
November. So what is that? April, June, July. It was 6 months. So she was right, and he was right. That's the weird part.
But Ro Khanna was writer. He was writer.
Yeah, yes, he was.
He was writer because she should resign.
Yes.
The idea also that she's presenting here is that she's the captain of the ship, and you stay with your ship. Like, he stayed on, like, I'm honor bound to stand with my country as I continue to poke holes in the hull of the ship that is sinking because of me. Like, there's this sense of, like, the what's crazy about all this actually is that no matter whose individual fault it is, ultimately, when something like this happens on your watch, you resign. I'm sorry if that is in certain situations unfair or sounds unfair, but, like, the honorable thing to do in most situations is, well, it's happened on my watch, so I'm going to step down, sort of thing. And she's gone 180 degrees in the other direction, which is like, this happened on my watch, I'm going to stay with the ship.
Right. So the story is weirder than this, because she's saying, I'm going to stay with my ship, which is delusional and stupid, because when you say I oversaw the worst failure lapse in my agency in 61 years, you're not saying anything that's good about you. And she has 2 different bosses. President of the United States is her boss, and the Secretary of Homeland Security is her boss. So Biden's not firing her, but Mayorkas could fire her. That's where the conspiracy stuff comes in, because it's not just that she won't go. So she's hanging on to but like a barnacle, right? She's hanging on for whatever psychological, personal reason she has. She is hanging on. It's not just, but it's like there's a conspiracy inside the Biden administration to let her stay. That's weird. So then you get into the Mayorkas has his own troubles, right? He's been found in contempt of Congress, I believe, right? Am I right about that?
Well, I think he was
impeached, or he wasn't impeached,
but
he was impeached by the Congress. He's got this, he's got that. So if the Mayorkas dynamic may be whatever Congress wants, I'm not going to do, but that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So and the FBI director, who isn't her boss but is conducting the investigation, could come out and say, I have no confidence in how the Secret Service is handling these matters in the wake.
Well, they did acknowledge that they denied additional security to Trump on the eve of her hearing.
Right. That's right.
So we already know
that was a huge part of the conspiracy stuff developing, because they denied that.
Why would you deny Trump additional security? He is the most famous person on the planet Earth. And yet you also had Congressman Benny Thompson, remember, actually writing legislation to deprive
the Disgrace Act, deprive felons of Secret Service coverage,
to deprive him of protection. And whose aide in the immediate aftermath of the shooting says, next time don't miss? Yeah. Benny Thompson's aide, who's then fired.
Yeah.
The climate,
that's Abe's point about the climate.
It's the climate, but it's not just the climate of failure, which I think Abe is getting at, and I completely agree. It's the climate of Trump derangement that is driving half the country, and particularly the half that holds key positions in government, media, culture, completely off the rails, so that they're making these weird decisions. They're not answering questions. They're saying they're hiding Joe Biden's condition, which was clear from, it was clear as early this year as when he said he would not do the Super Bowl interview. A week later, we had the Hur report where he was called a genial old man with a poor memory. He came out in the Oval Office or the White House and gave that weird emergency press conference that made only things worse. So we've known that there's something wrong with Biden for at least 6 months. Then they just swap him out mid-race and pretend like everything's fine now. We have this wonderful candidate. She just raised $80 million and we're so excited. She's brat. Kamala's brat because some British pop star said. So now we can just make her president and everyone can move on with their day. That's not only a failure, it is Trump derangement at work.
That's very important, and it connects to something that Trump can take advantage of. This is where I want to come back to. Democrats are fine with Kamala being the nominee. Democrats would be fine with anybody being the nominee, including the 14 million voters who voted for Biden. I accept that. And Kamala comes into the race with 45% of the vote. So would a tree stump. So would Gavin Newsom. So would Al Sharpton, for all I know. So would Cori Bush, for all I know, if this were the question of who was running for president in the immediate wake of Biden with Trump threatening, and you're a partisan Democrat. Republicans are going to get 45% of the vote, and Democrats are going to get 45% of the vote. The question is, what is the meta message from now until November that the 10% of this country that is going to decide this election is getting? And I think the fix is in. Look how they swapped Biden for Kamala like they were at a swap meet, and this is the leader of the free world, and it's some weird corporate cabal conspiracy between George Clooney, Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and the media. That's number one. And number two, meanwhile, in the middle of all this, Trump gets shot, and the Secret Service and the FBI are silent as to the reasons, causes, motives, and condition of the event in question after today. This is the 10th day since the shooting. The 10th day in a hot lead situation in which, unfortunately, in this case, the shooter is dead, so he can't tell you why he did what he did, though he wouldn't have to, obviously, because he could remain silent. That is part of the Trump message. They're lying to you. They're creating narratives so that they can hold on to power. They and Hollywood and the media.
The system is rigged.
The system is rigged, and boy, is it rigged. Like now, first of all, it was rigged against me. They sent local prosecutors, they sent federal prosecutors, they did an investigation on the Russia hoax, they did this. The system is rigged every which way. When the system spits out a non-compos mentis candidate for president in the Democratic Party, they just change the rules to get somebody better in order to continue to have their hold on power. I think that's a good message. I think that is the populist message that isn't just for Republicans. Republicans would believe it anyway. It's a question of what the people in the blue wall states in the upper Midwest, also faced with Kamala Harris, a luxury, what is it that Rob Henderson's term is? Luxury beliefs candidate, what she represents to them. And so that's why I say stop talking about how Biden is dead and just start talking about what the hell is going on here. Like, what on all fronts, you guys are clamming up, shutting the door, releasing weird statements, keeping the Secret Service director, and yes, the prime minister of our foremost ally in the Middle East has arrived in the United States to deliver a speech before Congress. And not only didn't anybody greet him at the airport, which I think is actually not entirely abnormal, but not only did anybody greet him at the airport, he's going to give a speech. Senators are refusing to come, like Patty Murray and others. And the president of the Senate, Kamala Harris, is refusing to attend the session. So there are no photos of her sitting behind him when he addresses a joint session of Congress. But she'll meet him later in private.
That's the thing, too, the meeting later in private. So the president had a meeting scheduled with Bibi before all this happened. That meeting has been canceled, but he's still the president. That's the other thing about the conspiracy theories and he's not, is he presidenting? Who's presidenting? Because
he doesn't have to meet Bibi. Look, Bibi got invited by Mike Johnson.
Kamala is meeting Bibi in Washington as if she's which is fine, which, by the way, is appropriate. Usually nominees do meet them, and also she's the stand-in, she's the standard bearer for her party. But it's just like, what is Joe Biden still doing there?
Right. Now, let's go to the meta meeting of Kamala refusing to sit behind Bibi at the joint session of Congress and then meeting him in private. We know that Kamala Harris's views on Israel are markedly to the left of Joe Biden's. We know that. It is a deliberate fact that we know that, because that was being retailed by the Biden administration, which was essentially sending her out to pacify and mollify the people in the Democratic Party who were upset with Biden's early support for Israel. So she was the person who accepted the call for the ceasefire in, I think, late October, which was when the ceasefire was simply a term for getting Israel to stop and letting Hamas survive. That the Biden administration, including Jake Sullivan and Blinken and Biden himself, did not accept. We know that her stepdaughter, Ella Emhoff, was raising money for UNRWA, which Israel is about to vote on. The UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Agency that runs the refugee camp part of Gaza and has since 1948. Israel will no longer have any connection, dealing with, financial relationship with, or passage through to UNRWA after 76 years almost. It is cutting UNRWA off. UNRWA's schools were weapons depots for Hamas. The tunnel system was built in and around UNRWA schools. surely with the knowledge of UNRWA's leading UNRWA officials. UNRWA officials there were UNRWA people running through Israel during the massacre on October 7th. All of that. Her daughter was raising money for UNRWA, her stepdaughter. She represents the luxury beliefs wing of the Democratic Party. We all know how they feel about Israel. Does this matter? I'm asking you politically in this race, or is everything so big that Israel is now just one? Does it matters to me? We can talk about morally why this is a wretched and horrible situation and circumstance that it has come to this. But politically, how do you think a Kamala Harris, who nominally says, I support Israel, but whose every gesture, act, facial expression, and everything like that says she doesn't?
I think it matters. I mean, we were seeing things among Jewish voters, and especially Jewish voters for whom Israel is a defining issue prior to the switcheroo. And again, it's the Biden-Harris administration. She's been a part of the Biden administration's record on Israel. And to the degree we know anything about her individual beliefs about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, they're worse than Joe Biden's. She was the most liberal senator when she ran for president in 2019. And then, of course, didn't even make it to Iowa. And so what that means is...
Remember, that's nothing. That's not nothing, because who was in that race? Bernie Sanders.
Right. Elizabeth Warren.
Kirsten Gillibrand.
The Democrats are pretty liberal in the Senate, and she was the most liberal. And so I think that it will be part of the Republican messaging. I mean, Israel is more than just another country. It's kind of a synecdoche of a whole belief system, a whole worldview. And I think that came across in the convention last week, where you saw the Nutras, and you saw Shabbos Kestenbaum, and they were saying, and the crowd is crying out, "Free them now." So I do think it will matter, and it will be just one another reminder that Harris is not really any different than what we've experienced for the past 4 years, that she's
or worse,
and she could be worse, and she's really kind of a stand-in for the what they called what did Phyllis Schlafly call them, the secret kingmakers in the Democratic Party, right? When Phyllis Schlafly, the Republican activist, wrote A Choice Not an Echo in 1964, making the case for Barry Goldwater. She was lambasting the Republican establishment for choosing the Republican nominees for the last 20 years. She called them the secret kingmakers. Well, they're clearly now, I mean, not so secret kingmakers. We know it's Pelosi and Obama and a few other people, but Harris is a stand-in for their beliefs, which are too left for most Americans.
I'm still waiting, by the way, and this is a continuation of our discussion yesterday or the night before. I'm still waiting for the first day that she is pressed on these issues.
She has to be talked to by someone to press her.
Right.
So that's the question is, okay, as I say, I think Matt made the point that we should not expect a public appearance from her as in a real campaign setting as the candidate until Biden formally speaks and then gives a speech in which he says she's the greatest and she'll be the greatest or whatever, something like that.
Well, he did call into the Kamala radio
show.
Yeah,
but I'm talking about the speech that he has promised, right? The nationwide address to the country in which he explains his reasons for leaving or whatever. If that's going to happen, he said it was going to happen on Sunday, or whoever wrote with the auto pen said it was going to happen on Sunday. So again, let's just say for the sake of argument that is or is not going to happen. Like I said, I spotted her till Thursday. If we hit Thursday, she hasn't given an interview and she hasn't had to say anything outside of the "let's go team," stuff at a high school where she's handing out a ribbon. Then that'll be an interesting tell, and it will be an interesting test of the press relating to her.
I mean, part of the issue here, I think, is that the most salient stories in our news cycle now have to do with not with policy, but with her political system and our election. And it's so sort of meta that there's no looking out onto world issues right now. There's the people aren't thinking about, no one's being asked about what's happening in Israel.
Just to make a final point, she has to give these interviews because the race is on to define Kamala Harris in the eyes of the public. You have a moment now where she has the opportunity to reintroduce herself. Now, this is like the 6th time she's reintroduced herself to the American public, but it's also the most prominent time. She's now the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party. So you're going to have the 60 Minutes interview. You're going to have to go on the Today Show. You're going to have to try and sit for, Bloomberg, right? You're going to have her national security advisor, Phil Gordon, write an essay for Foreign Affairs laying out what the Harris foreign policy would look like. It won't come immediately, but it will come. And when she makes these statements, they are going to open up new avenues, I believe, of attack by Trump and by the Republicans.
There's also the chaos part of why the Israel stuff matters, because I think you can connect the two, because you have Bibi showing up in Washington and it's like, that popular gif of John Travolta in Pulp Fiction where he walks into Uma Thurman's apartment and hears her voice but doesn't see her, and he just sort of shrugs and he looks this way and he looks that way and he crinkles his eyebrows. Hey, anybody home? And that is part of not just, Israel is important enough. You don't want that to happen whether they're fighting a war or not, but that's part of the chaos thing, I think, which is why it matters, which is like, hey, Israel's here. Anybody hello, it's Israel. Israel's here. And so and then the other part of that is that you don't feel like Bibi's going to speak, and it was Kamala said she's not going to preside. It was determined, according to the New York Times, that it would be inappropriate for the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, to be the one to preside instead. Why? Because a few months ago, he called for Bibi to be removed from office. So he can't be the one sitting behind him. There's a chaos thing here where the Democrats, they never seem to be looking more than one move ahead, if that, but also all these things are coming back to bite them and they look unprepared. Well, who do we have? Who can preside over a long scheduled address to a joint session of Congress?
I have the answer. John Fetterman.
That's
John
right.
Fetterman should be sitting in that chair. He's the one senator wants to sit in that chair. A couple of things about this speech and about Bibi's visit. It comes as effectively Israel now believes it has won the war in Gaza. The one thing it hasn't done is kill Sinwar, but we now have confirmation that Mohammed Deif, the head, essentially the Dwight Eisenhower, that's a horrible, the Rommel, I don't know what you would call him, the Rommel of Gaza was killed last week. They've run out of targets. They have control over. They can go anywhere in Gaza without being shot at. They have control of Gaza. And effectively Hamas, half of Hamas has been killed or something like that. The rest are in the tunnels. They can't get out of the tunnels. There's no escape for them. And so he's actually coming at a moment at which Israel has secured its aim as supported by the United States. Even if the United States said, don't go into Rafah, they went anyway and they got what they wanted. What they haven't done and what hasn't happened, obviously, is the release of the hostages. And the thing to be prepared for is Bibi potentially announcing that because they have secured their war aims in Gaza, because they believe that they can, at a moment's notice, do what is necessary to, if the, to whack a mole. If someone pops up from a tunnel, they can whack that tunnel instantly, whether or not they can announce a hostage deal or some kind of hostage deal. And if that is the case, the Prime Minister of Israel will be coming to the United States to announce that 5 Americans held hostage are going to be released under the terms of this hostage deal, however that functions, while Evan Gershkovich remains in a Russian prison, sentenced to 16 years of hard labor as a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, about which Joe Biden has done nothing, from what we can tell. He doesn't mention Evan Gershkovich. Every 3 months he mentions Evan Gershkovich. Doesn't mention the hostages in Israel. Doesn't mention Evan Gershkovich. Very excited for the 6'9" basketball player a couple of years ago. That was very important. 5 Americans under, absolutely. Now, maybe BB isn't going to announce this. This is a complicated issue about the invitation. The other, so he may announce to America that he has secured the release, or will be securing the release of 5 Americans from this horrible captivity.
And on that score, we should note that he's traveled with families of captives have come here with him, and that was the inkling that there was that he only allowed this sort of that they came with him, and then the chatter afterwards was them talking to the press saying, well, anything less than the announcement of a deal would be a massive humiliation. So
the other thing that he will, I'm sure, talk about, and that the optics of the House chamber are going to look very weird, he is going to talk about how the war that Iran is launching with its proxies in Hezbollah and Yemen is a war against the United States, and that Iran is ultimately the antagonist here, not Hamas, not Hezbollah. Iran is the antagonist here. Iran's, according to Tony Blinken, 2 weeks from breakout, and the Houthis just fired a drone that nearly hit the U.S. consulate in Tel Aviv. Our war is your war. This chamber is going to be full, I assume. Maybe a bunch of Democrats aren't going to show up. What's the applause going to look like? You're going to have Republicans standing every 3 minutes for everything that he says. Are the Democrats going to sit on their hands? Is that going to be a good look? 60% of the United States, according to polls, 60 to 70% of the United States, if you're 80% of the United States, if you're talking about Israel versus Hamas alone, 80% of the United States supports Israel as against Hamas. Those numbers start declining if you're talking generically about Palestinians or something like that. The Democratic Party is in the sway of an extremist faction, or is concerned about an extremist faction, worried about the extremist faction and its behavior. Maybe the speech will get disrupted. What if Medea Benjamin and Code Pink start screaming at Netanyahu from the gallery, or the squad stages a walkout or something like that? Again, politically very complicated. That is not going to help Kamala Harris. But first, do no harm, right? That's the first rule of medicine and politics. Like, don't create events and moments that you can't control the outcome of.
Yeah, I don't think it's complicated. I think it'll be bad for them. I think it'll be straightforwardly bad. But again, we are in this suspended limbo here until that happens, or until something else happens, where world events are somehow not yet intruding on our politics at this moment. We are totally sort of set apart, and that is protecting Kamala and the Democrats generally right now. They don't have to comment on anything.
If we have one day, if today, Tuesday, something major doesn't happen in the news, That will be the first day that is the case.
Right.
In 5 weeks, or since June 27th or something like that, whenever the debate was. So I wouldn't bet on that.
On the other
yesterday,
hand,
we not only had Kamala rolling up the nomination, we had Kimberly Cheadle's testimony before the House Oversight Committee. I don't know what the news is going to be today, but this is the point now, which is that Kamala Harris is now the the presidential nominee of the United States. Something big happens, she cannot remain silent.
right. Well, that's the thing, is what if the big news is something that you need President of the United States, who is still Joe Biden, the President of the United States, to comment on, right? What if the drone hit the embassy, the consulate?
Right.
The Houthis fired very, very carefully and very accurately, and John, I think you mentioned it was like 1,600 miles, but they added like 600 miles or something to the trip because they had to go through this. I mean, it was the weaving in and out of airspace.
Yeah, to evade.
They sent a decoy onto the other side of the radar, or whatever. It looks like they very nearly successfully blew up the U.S. consulate building in Tel Aviv, or severely damaged it with a drone. What happens in that sort of situations? That there's all this news going on, and we all feel the chaos. But what happens if a world affairs story hits that has to be commented on by the president of the United States?
There will be a world affairs story that Kamala Harris has to talk about between now and November. Right? There will be. Russia's going to do something. The Iranians are going to do something. Israel's going to have to go to war in Lebanon. Whatever. She's going to have to open her mouth about it. And it will be a signature moment, because we sort of know what Trump will say under those circumstances, which is, if you're going to go do it hard. Hit him hard. Show him, give him hell, and then I'll negotiate the peace afterward, or something like that. She is now in an Etch-a-Sketch situation in which she can reset policy. She doesn't have to say we have the right policy. She can do whatever. It's very interesting. This is not, again, an unprecedented situation. And what else is an unprecedented situation is the fact that I actually have a movie in movie theaters that I can do as our commentary recommends. Because I went last night to see the hit of the summer so far, Twisters, the legacy sequel to the movie Twister, which came out 30 years ago. Shares none of the same characters. It's about tornado chasers, just as the original Twister was. And it is a popcorn movie that of the likes of which people haven't made in a very long time. I mean, it's like, just settle back. It's fun. It's funny. Even though it shows immense amounts of tornado destruction, it's very light-spirited and lighthearted. And as directed by, very unusually, this director, Lee Isaac Chung, whose last movie was this beautiful immigrant story, Minari, about Koreans who have a farm in Kentucky, which was nominated for an Oscar. He was nominated for writing and directing. So that was a very little movie, like a little slice of life. This is a movie, big, broad, with spectacular special effects, but spends a lot of time on character, a lot of time letting you get to know these and like these people. And it is a Trump movie. It is a movie about Oklahoma. Everyone in Oklahoma is nice. There's a big scene at a rodeo. It sort of reminds me of Yellowstone in the sense that it's a portrait of, America in, middle America, where people just want to do good for other people, and they love their families and they love each other, and they have really nice towns. And there's a town called El Reno, Oklahoma, that looks like you want to go and move and live there yourself. It's so adorable. And this is what this natural disaster is threatening. And so the stakes are, you're ruining a place where Trump gets 72% of the vote. Do something about it. This is not at all a message in the movie, although I will say there is one thing in it, just like Minari, that leads me to believe that Lee Isaac Chung is a secret Trumper, which is that among the things that gets destroyed by the tornado in one scene is a wind farm with the giant rotary, wind, which is of course part of the Green New Deal program, is to put these wind farms everywhere. So there are these big turbine wind farms. They're spinning and they're spinning, and then the tornado comes through. It starts tearing off the arms of the wings on the wind farm. It's like, don't put a wind farm here. This is not smart. So the only damage we ever really see is to an environmental project. I mean, except for the damage to houses. But like a point is made of destroying a like Green New Deal environmental project. That's just a little Easter egg for those of us who know and love the issue of the wind farm.
I just, by the way, since you're talking about this and you're a movie critic, I have to ask, every Glenn Powell movie is beloved by critics and audiences alike, right? I don't know what it is.
Well,
but
no, so Glenn Powell.
This is a remake. Sometimes it's a rom-com. Sometimes it's a comedy. He's like making all these different movies. But when was the last time you saw a run where everybody was like, every movie this guy's in, people really love?
Yeah, well, so he made this rom-com at the beginning of the year called Anyone But You, with Sydney Sweeney. It was critically reviled, and it had a really bad opening. Like, it opened to very little money. And then it made, as they say, 10 times the amount of money that it did its opening weekend over the course of its run. That's the sign of a breakout hit. That's all word of mouth. That was Glenn Powell. Then he made this movie on Netflix, which is also pretty good, called Hitman. It was whatever it was. And now this is a massive hit, which means he's had a comedy hit and an action hit in the same 6-month period. That's how someone becomes a major star. It's like being a great pitcher. Like, you have to have 2 speeds. You have to be Chris Pratt. The last person this reminds me of is Chris Pratt, right, who was a doofus funny guy on Parks and Recreation, and then comes out of nowhere as an action star in Guardians of the Galaxy, and then becomes the biggest male star in America. And that is sort of what's happening to Glenn Powell. Somebody I'm not to be honest, not that crazy about myself, but but he gets the full glam. Oh my God, he's got the cowboy hat, and he's like got the the grin, the kind of Tom Cruise grin, and he is, it's a pretty awesome. Anyway, so I can unreservedly recommend a visit to the multiplex to see Twisters. You can take your whole family. There's I don't even think there's any cursing in it. It is a delight, even though it is a disaster movie, but the disaster doesn't really sting. You know what I mean? Some pretty horrifying things happen, but you don't really care. It's more like, if you remember the famous shot in the original was a cow going into the clouds. Other things going into the clouds here. Anyway, Twisters. Oddly, I never like hits anymore. This one I really liked. So we will be back tomorrow with more conspiracy theories and hijinks. For Matt, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.